The rain had not stopped for 9 days on Vorath 4. Daniel Webb watched the water levels rise on his monitoring screen. Numbers climbed in red. Charts spiked in patterns he had seen before, back on Earth, back when he pulled bodies from floods instead of studying alien weather systems. He knew what those patterns meant. Death was coming down from the mountains. The research station held 12 humans. They were guests on this world, allowed to study and build only in approved zones. The real owners of Vorath 4 were the Reddi, a species of six-limbed predators that moved like shadows and killed like nightmares. 3 survey teams had died learning that lesson. Now humans stayed in their stations and watched from a distance. Daniel zoomed his sensors toward the valley where the Blackwater River curved through ancient forest. The Reddi nesting grounds spread across the floodplain like a scattered village. He counted the heat signatures. 6 adult females, 17 cubs. The cubs were too young to swim. He pulled up the dam readings from mountains. The old structure, built by some forgotten species 1,000 years ago, held back a lake the size of small sea. Cracks had formed in the stone. Water pushed through in streams that grew wider every hour. Daniel walked to the communication room where Trill waited. The Galactic Union observer resembled a crane made of blue glass, all angles and clicking joints. Trill had authority over human actions on this planet. The dam will fail, Daniel said. Maybe 2 days, maybe less. The flood will hit the nesting grounds. Trill's head rotated in that unsettling way bird species had. This is noted. Those cubs cannot survive that kind of water. None of them. This is also noted. Trill's voice held no emotion. The Reddi have survived on this world for 60 million years. They will adapt or they will not. This is the way of nature. We could warn them, move them, something. You could not. The Prime Directive forbids interference with developing species. The Reddi must find their own path. Trill turned away. Your concern is documented. Engineer Webb, return to your duties. Daniel stood alone in the hallway for a long time. That night, he watched the nesting grounds through the long-range cameras. The mothers had built their dens from fallen trees and river clay. Cubs tumbled over each other in play, their scales catching moonlight in flashes of green and gold. They looked like children everywhere looked. Small, trusting, unaware that the world could hurt them. One mother, larger than the others, sat at the edge of the water. Her 3 cubs splashed in the shallows while she watched. Daniel had seen her before in the recordings. The researchers called her Relvani, though that was just their guess at the sound she made. She had survived 3 nesting seasons. Her cubs always lived. Daniel wondered if her luck would hold that doctor. Amira Osei found him at midnight, still watching. You should sleep, she said. Cannot. Amira was the station's xenobiologist. She had spent 4 years studying the Reddi from a distance, learning their sounds, their movements, their terrible beauty. She understood them better than anyone. She also understood Daniel. The dam, she said. It was not a question. 40 hours. Maybe less if the rain keeps up. Amira sat beside him. On the screen, a cub had wandered too far from its mother. Relvani made a low sound, and the cub scrambled back. They are apex predators, Amira said quietly. They have killed humans. They would kill you without hesitation. I know. The Union will remove you from the planet if you interfere. They might prosecute you. Your career would be over. I know. Amira was silent for a moment. Those cubs have never seen a human up close. They would not understand that you were trying to help. Daniel finally looked away from the screen. When I was 23, I pulled a child from a flood in Bangladesh. She was 4 years old. She bit me so hard I needed stitches. She did not understand I was helping either. He touched the scar on his wrist without thinking. She lived. That is what mattered. Amira had no answer for that. The alert came at dawn. The dam sensors showed catastrophic failure in progress. Water was pouring through gaps in the stone faster than the river could carry it away. A wall of destruction was building in the mountains, gathering strength, preparing to fall. Daniel was already running. He grabbed his survival pack from his quarters. Rebreather, emergency beacon, water purification tablets, rope. Nothing that would help against a Reddi attack, but he had made his choice. He would not need weapons where he was going. Amira caught him at the station door. Daniel, wait. He stopped but did not turn around. I'm not going to report you missing, she said. Not for at least 6 hours. That is all I can give you. It is enough. Come back alive. Please. Daniel stepped into the rain and began to run. The forest swallowed him within minutes. Behind him, the station lights faded into the storm. Ahead, the Blackwater River roared with growing fury. And in the valley below, 17 cubs played at the water's edge, not knowing that a human was coming to save them or die trying. The dam broke at noon. Daniel heard it from the ridge above the nesting grounds. A sound like thunder that did not stop. He looked down at the mothers gathering their cubs, at the water beginning to rise, at the chaos that was just beginning. Then he started running downhill. 17 years ago, Daniel Webb had stood on a boat in the middle of a hurricane and watched a family drown. The memory came to him now as he ran through the alien forest. Rain slashed his face. Thunder rolled across the sky. The ground shook with the force of water breaking free from the mountains. And in his mind, he was 22 years old again, reaching for a child's hand that slipped away into the dark. He had joined the Coast Guard to save people. He had failed that day. The family had been too far, the waves too strong, the storm too hungry. He had screamed until his throat bled, but the ocean did not care about human grief. It simply took what it wanted. That he had saved hundreds after that. Thousands, maybe if he counted all the rescues across all the years. But he still dreamed about the ones he lost. The child's face, the mother's eyes, the father's hand reaching up one last time before the water closed over them all. Daniel had left Earth because he could not stand to watch another flood. The Galactic Colonization Corps had seemed like an escape. Study weather on distant worlds. Build systems to predict disasters. Help from a safe distance. Now here he was, running toward exactly the kind of death he had fled. The forest opened onto the ridge above the nesting grounds. Daniel stopped to catch his breath and looked down at the valley. What he saw made his heart freeze. The water was rising faster than he had calculated. The Verratti mothers were already struggling. They moved like cats, graceful and deadly on solid ground, but their dense bodies and powerful hunting muscles worked against them in water. They could swim short distances in calm rivers. They could not fight a flood. He saw Relvani pushing 2 cubs toward higher ground with her massive head. Her third cub, the smallest one, had been carried away by the current. It clung to a branch 30 meters downstream, crying in frequencies that hurt Daniel's ears even from this distance. Other mothers faced the same horror. Cubs scattered like leaves in the wind. The adults splashed into the water, reaching for their children, being pushed back by the force of the flow. One mother nearly drowned trying to reach her own. Daniel did the math in his head. 6 mothers, 17 cubs. Water rising by the minute. Temperature dropping. The cubs could not survive long in that cold. No one was coming to help. The Union had rules. The station had protocols. Daniel was alone on a ridge in the rain, watching children die that he thought about Amira's warning. The Verratti killed humans. They did not understand friendship or gratitude. They were predators who saw anything smaller than themselves as food. If he went down there, if he entered their territory while they were panicked and protective, they would tear him apart. He thought about the child in Bangladesh. The bite scar on his wrist, that he thought about the family in the hurricane, reaching up from the water one last time. Daniel pulled off his heavy outer jacket. It would drag him down in the current. He checked his rebreather, made sure the seal was tight. He had maybe 4 hours of air if he was careful. Enough time to save some of them. Maybe all of them if he was lucky. Luck had never been his strength. Stubbornness was that he started down the slope. The first mother saw him when he was 50 meters from the water's edge. She was a scarred old female, bigger than the others, with one eye clouded white. The researchers had called her Keth R.A. She had killed 2 humans in the early days of the survey, back when the first teams had not understood how dangerous this species could be. To Keth R.A. saw Daniel and screamed. The sound was like metal tearing. A warning. A threat. A promise of violence. Daniel kept walking. The other mothers turned. 6 pairs of eyes locked onto the human, descending into their territory. Their cubs were drowning in the river behind them. But ancient instinct told them the real danger was approaching on two legs. They gathered together, forming a wall of teeth and claws between Daniel and the water. He stopped 10 meters away. The rain hammered down. The river roared. Somewhere in the chaos, a cub screamed as the current dragged it under a fallen tree. Daniel pointed at the river. Then he pointed at himself. Then he walked past the mothers and into the water. Kethare could have killed him. She was close enough, fast enough. She had done it before, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he moved without fear. Maybe it was the direction he was heading. Maybe it was simply confusion at behavior that made no sense to a predator's mind. Daniel dove into the flood and disappeared under the brown water. The mothers watched. They did not understand. They could not follow. All they could do was wait while a strange creature swam toward their dying children. Relvana saw him surface near her smallest cub. She saw him grab the branch, steady himself, and pull the cub free from the debris. She saw him swim back toward shore with her child held above the water. She did not attack when he placed the cub on the muddy bank. She did not attack when he turned and dove back into the river without looking at her. She simply stood there, frozen, as the human who should have been her enemy began to save everything she loved. The cold hit Daniel like a hammer. The Blackwater River had earned its name. The water was dark with mud and debris, filled with branches and rocks, and everything the flood had torn loose from the mountains. Visibility was zero. Daniel swam by feel, by instinct, by the desperate sounds of cubs crying somewhere in the chaos. He found the second cub tangled in reeds near the far bank. The little creature thrashed and bit when he grabbed it, sharp teeth sinking into his forearm. Daniel did not let go. He kicked toward the surface, broke through into the rain, and swam one-armed toward the nearest patch of solid ground, and a mother was waiting there. Not Relvani, a younger one with two cubs already pressed against her legs. She hissed when Daniel approached, her scales rising along her spine like a warning. Daniel placed her cub on the mud and backed away. The mother sniffed her child. The cub shook water from its scales and scrambled to join its siblings. The mother looked at Daniel with an expression he could not read. Then she turned away, gathering her family closer. Point 3 saved. 14 to go. Daniel dove back in. The current was getting stronger. The dam must have fully collapsed now, releasing the entire lake in one terrible wave. Daniel felt the water pulling at him, trying to drag him downstream toward the rocks. He fought against it, swimming at an angle. Using techniques he had learned in a different ocean on a different world, a cub floated past, clinging to a piece of driftwood. Daniel caught it, steadied the wood, and began kicking toward shore. The cub stared at him with huge golden eyes. It was too scared to bite, too young to understand what was happening. It just held on and trusted that somehow this strange creature would make things better. Point 4, save. Point 5. 6. 7. Daniel lost track of time. The world became simple. Swim, find, grab, return, repeat. His muscles burned. His lungs ached. The gash on his forearm from the second cub's bite was bleeding freely now, turning the water around him pink. He found 3 cubs trapped together on a fallen tree that was slowly sinking. They cried when they saw him, high-pitched screams of terror at the approaching predator. Daniel ignored their fear. He grabbed the first one, tucked it under his arm, and swam. Came back, grabbed the second, came back. The third was the smallest of all the cubs, barely old enough to have left its mother's side. It went limp when Daniel picked it up, playing dead the way prey animals did when caught. Not today, Daniel said through his rebreather. Not today, little one. 10 saved. The mothers had stopped hissing at him. They lined the bank now, watching, waiting. When Daniel brought a cub close, they would wade into the shallows to take it. No words passed between them. No understanding in any language either species knew. Just the simple transaction of a child passed from one set of arms to another. Relvani brought her rescued cub to the others and returned to the water's edge. She was pacing, making sounds Daniel had never heard in any recording. Low rumbles that vibrated through the air. Keening notes that sounded almost like singing. Grief, maybe, or hope, or something in between that had no name. Her eyes never left Daniel. Point 11 saved. 12. 13. Daniel was slowing down. The cold had seeped into his bones. His movements were getting clumsy. He missed a grab and had to circle back, wasting precious energy. The cub he was chasing had been in the water too long. Its eyes were closing. Its grip on the branch was failing. Daniel reached it just as it let go. He caught the small body before it sank, kicked hard for the surface, broke through and gasped, his rebreather sputtering, damaged by some impact he did not remember taking. The cub was limp in his arms, not moving, not breathing, and oh, not this time. Daniel made it to shore and laid the cub on the mud. He pressed on its chest the way he had been trained, adapting the technique for an alien body. Water poured from its mouth. Its small lungs expanded once, twice. Then it coughed and opened its eyes and screamed for its mother. Kethra was there instantly. The old scarred killer, the one who had murdered humans, stood over Daniel with her teeth bared and her claws extended. He looked up at her, exhausted, bleeding, too tired to be afraid. "Your child," he said, though she could not understand the words. He pushed the cub toward her. "Take your child." Kethra looked at the cub, looked at Daniel. Something shifted in her remaining eye. She picked up her cub gently in her jaws and stepped back. Point 14 saved. Daniel turned toward the river. Three more cubs somewhere in that hell of water and debris. He could hear them crying. He could barely stand. He went back in anyway. Kethra had killed 17 creatures in her long life. She remembered each one. The rival who challenged her mother. The beast that threatened her first litter. The two humans who came with their strange tools and loud voices, who smelled like fear and acted like prey, but carried weapons that burned. She had torn them apart in the old hunting grounds, protecting her territory, protecting her family. She felt no guilt. Predators did not feel guilt. They simply survived. Now she stood on the riverbank and watched one of those same creatures save her grandcub's life. The human moved through the water like nothing she had ever seen. He was soft, clawless. His skin tore easily, leaking red into the current. He had no scales to protect him from the cold, no gills to let him breathe beneath the surface. By every measure her instincts understood, he should have died in the first minute. He did not die. He kept swimming, kept diving, kept coming back with cubs in his arms, placing them gently on the shore before turning back toward the flood. Debris struck him, and he kept moving. The cold turned his skin strange colors, and he kept moving. He bled from a dozen wounds, and he kept moving. Kethra did not understand. Relvana stood beside her, watching the human rescue her third cub from a tangle of branches. The younger mother was making sounds Kethra had never heard before. Not fear, not aggression. Something new, something without a name in their language. "What is he?" Relvani asked. Kethra had no answer. The other mothers had gathered along the bank. Sarah, who had lost her mate to the sickness last season. The twins who nested together and raised their cubs as one family. Old Vinna, who had seen more floods than any of them and knew that cubs died in water like this. They all watched the human with the same confused silence. Point 15 cubs safe now. Two still missing. Kethra knew where they were. She could hear their cries coming from downstream, where the largest tree in the valley had fallen across the river. The current had piled debris against it, creating a wall of broken wood and trapped water. The two cubs were somewhere in that mess, caught in spaces too small for an adult variety to reach. The human heard them too. He was swimming toward the fallen tree, fighting the current that tried to push him past. Venus spoke first. "He will drown." "Yes," Kethra agreed. "Then the cubs will die." "Yes." They watched in silence. The human reached the debris pile and began to climb. The wood shifted under his weight. He fell once, caught himself, kept climbing. When he reached a gap between the branches, he took a deep breath and went under. The mothers waited. 1 heartbeat. 2. 10. 20. "He is dead," Sarah said. The water churned. A small head broke the surface, coughing and crying. Then the human appeared beside it, pushing the cub toward open water, toward the mothers waiting on the shore. He did not follow. He took another breath and went back under. Relvana moved before Kethra could stop her. The young mother waded into the shallows, her powerful legs bracing against the current. When the cub floated close enough, She grabbed it in her jaws and carried it to safety point 16, save point 1 left. The human was under the water for a long time, longer than before. The debris pile groaned and shifted. Branches snapped. The entire structure was collapsing, falling apart under the force of the flood. Kethra found herself leaning forward. Her claws dug into the mud. Her breath came fast and shallow. She did not understand why she cared if this creature lived or died. He was human. He was the enemy. He was everything her instincts told her to kill. But he had saved her grand cub. He had saved all of them. He had walked into a predator's territory and fought a river that was trying to kill everything in its path. And he had done it for children that were not his own. The water exploded. The human broke the surface with the last cub clutched against his chest. The debris pile collapsed behind him, huge logs tumbling through the water like thrown spears. He kicked desperately, trying to reach the shore before the wave of destruction caught him, that he was not fast enough that a log struck him across the back. He went under. The cub went under with him. The mother screamed. All of them, together, a sound that shook the trees. Kethra was running before she knew what she was doing, splashing into the shallows. Reaching toward the place where the human had disappeared, he surfaced 1 meter from her claws. The cub was still in his arms, alive, crying, whole. Daniel Webb looked up at the ancient predator who had killed his kind before. He was too weak to swim anymore, too hurt to run. He could only float there, holding the last cub, waiting for whatever came next. Kethra reached down and took the cub from his arms. Gently, more gently than she had ever done anything in her long, violent life. Then she grabbed the human by his strange coverings and dragged him to shore. Daniel could not feel his legs. He lay on the muddy bank where Kethra had dragged him, staring up at the gray sky, watching rain fall into his eyes. His body had stopped shivering. That was bad. He knew from training that when the shivering stopped, the cold had gone too deep. Hypothermia was setting in. His core temperature was dropping. Without warmth, he would die that he did not move. He was not sure he could move. The log had hit him hard, and something in his back was wrong. Not broken, maybe just wrong. Every breath sent fire through his ribs. .17 cubs. He had counted them. 17 small shapes huddled together on the shore, crying and shaking, but alive. All of them alive, that he smiled. It probably looked strange on his frozen face. He did not care. The mothers were gathering around him. Daniel watched them approach through half-closed eyes. 6 predators, each one powerful enough to tear him apart in seconds. They moved slowly, cautiously, the way hunters approach something they did not understand. Kethra stood closest. The old female looked down at him with her one good eye. Her scales were dark with rain. Her claws sank into the mud near his head. She could kill him so easily. One swipe, one bite. It would be over before he felt anything. She did not attack. Instead, she made a sound, low and rumbling, deep in her chest. Daniel did not know what it meant. He did not know anything about Varadi language or culture or emotion. He only knew that the sound was not aggressive. It was almost gentle. Relvani came next. She carried her smallest cub in her jaws, the one Daniel had pulled from the debris at the very beginning. She placed the cub on the ground beside him. The small creature wobbled on unsteady legs, still weak from its time in the water. Then it crawled forward and curled up against Daniel's chest. He felt the warmth immediately. Varadi body temperature ran hotter than human. The cub was like a small furnace pressed against his failing heart. "Thank you," Daniel whispered. His voice barely worked. "Thank you." Relvani did not understand the words, but she settled down on his other side, her massive body blocking the wind and rain. Another wall of warmth. Another impossible kindness from a creature that should have been his enemy. The other mothers followed. Sarah brought her cubs and lay down nearby. The twins curled together with their combined litter between them. Old Venna, who had seen so many floods and so much death, positioned herself to shield Daniel from the cold air coming off the river. He was surrounded by predators. He had never been safer in his life. More cubs crept forward. They were curious, these little ones. The terror was fading as their mother's calm spread through the group. They sniffed at Daniel's strange clothes, nipped at his fingers, climbed over his legs. One particularly bold cub tried to chew on his boot. Daniel laughed. It hurt his ribs terribly. He laughed anyway. The sound made the mothers tense for a moment. Then Kethare made that low rumble again, and they relaxed. Whatever the human was doing, it was not a threat. It was just something humans did. Strange creatures. Impossible to understand. Time passed. The rain began to slow. The river's roar faded as the flood waters spread out across the valley, losing their fury in the open space. The worst was over. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time he woke, the cubs had rearranged themselves around him. At one point, he counted 8 small bodies pressed against his own, sharing heat, sharing comfort. The mothers watched over them all like guardian statues. He woke fully to the sound of engines. A shuttle was descending through the clouds. Human design. Research station markings on the hull. Daniel watched it land on the ridge where he had stood hours ago, a lifetime ago. Amira was the first one out. She ran down the slope with a medical kit in her hands, followed by 2 other researchers carrying emergency gear. They stopped at the edge of the clearing where the Verati had gathered. Kethare rose to her full height. Even from a distance, Daniel could see Amira go pale. The old predator was terrifying, scarred, massive, clearly capable of killing everyone present. "It is okay," Daniel called out. His voice was weak but carried in the sudden silence. "They will not hurt you. They are protecting me." Amira stared. "Protecting you?" "Long story." Daniel tried to sit up and failed. "I could use some help." The mothers parted to let Amira through. She knelt beside Daniel with tears in her eyes, checking his pulse, his temperature, the wounds that covered his body. The cubs scattered at her approach, but did not go far. "You are an idiot," Amira said. "An absolute idiot." 17 cubs, Daniel replied. "All alive." Amira looked around at the gathered Verati, at the mothers who had let a human into their midst, at the cubs who were already creeping back, curious about this new stranger. "What did you do?" she asked. Daniel closed his eyes. The warmth of the cubs was fading as the medical team took over, wrapping him in thermal blankets, preparing him for transport. But he could still feel Relvana's presence nearby. Still hear Kethare's low rumble. "I just went swimming," he said, and then the darkness took him. 2 months later, Daniel stood at the edge of the research station compound and watched Relvani approach. She moved through the morning mist like a ghost, her scales catching the weak sunlight in flashes of emerald. Her 3 cubs followed behind her, tumbling over each other in play, completely unafraid of the human structures ahead. They had been coming here every few days since the flood. Daniel was no longer surprised to see them, that he walked to the fence and waited. Relvani stopped 3 meters away. Her cubs ran forward without hesitation, pressing their small bodies against the barrier, reaching through the gaps with their paws. Daniel crouched down and let them sniff his hands. One of them, the smallest one he had rescued first, climbed halfway up the fence, trying to reach his face. "Good morning to you too," Daniel said. The cub chirped at him. It had learned that sound meant something to the human. Maybe hello, maybe food, maybe just acknowledgement. Daniel chirped back, and the cub's eyes went wide with delight. Relvani watched this exchange without moving. She had not attacked Daniel since the flood. She had not attacked any human. None of the mothers had. Something had changed in the valley that day. Something that the Galactic Union was still trying to understand. The inquiry board had arrived 3 weeks ago. 7 representatives from 7 species, all of them very serious about protocol violations and interference regulations. They had questioned Daniel for hours. Why did he violate the Prime Directive? Did he understand the consequences? Was he aware that his actions could have started an interspecies war? Daniel had answered honestly. He saw children dying. He could help. So he helped. The board had not known what to do with that. Trill had pushed hard for Daniel's removal. The avian observer considered the whole situation a disaster, a contamination of natural development, a corruption of Vorati culture. But then Kethare had appeared at the station gates with a fresh kill in her jaws. She had placed it at Daniel's feet and walked away in Vorati culture. That meant something. The xenobiologists were still arguing about exactly what, but the general agreement was that it marked Daniel as pack adjacent. accepted, protected, part of the group in some way that had never been offered to any other species. The Inquiry Board had watched the security footage of that moment. They had watched Kethare, the killer of humans, bow her head to the man who saved her grand cub. They had watched the other mothers bring their cubs to the fence, day after day, letting them interact with Daniel through the barrier. The board had ruled that removing Daniel would cause more harm than leaving him. The first positive relationship between humans and Verratti in history was too valuable to destroy over paperwork. Daniel was still stationed on Vorith 4. He was still an engineer, but now he had a second job that no one had officially given him. He was the bridge. Today was different, though. Today, Relvani had not stopped at the fence. She made a sound, low and deliberate, a call that Daniel had heard before in recordings from the nesting grounds. The sound a mother made when inviting her cubs to follow. Daniel looked at the fence, looked at Relvani, looked at the path leading into the forest, toward the valley where 17 cubs had nearly drowned and one human had earned something that could not be bought. He opened the gate and stepped through. The walk took an hour. Relvana led the way, her cubs bouncing around Daniel's legs like oversized puppies. They had grown so much in 2 months. The smallest one was almost up to his hip now, its scales darkening from juvenile gold to adult green. The nesting grounds had recovered from the flood. New dens had been built on higher ground, away from the river's reach. The mothers had learned something too. When Daniel entered the clearing, all 6 of them were waiting. Kethare sat in the center, her one good eye fixed on him. Sara and the twins flanked her. Old Venna watched from the shade of a massive tree. 17 cubs played in the grass. All alive, all healthy, all curious about the strange pale creature their mothers had invited into their home. Daniel sat down in the middle of the clearing. The cubs swarmed him immediately. They climbed over his shoulders and pulled at his hair and tried to fit their paws into his pockets. One particularly ambitious cub attempted to drag him toward its den, apparently convinced he needed to see something important. The mothers watched. Kethare made that low rumbling sound that Daniel had come to recognize as approval. Relvana settled down beside him, close enough that their bodies touched, and began to sing. It was the lullaby she sang to her cubs. Daniel had heard it through the monitoring equipment, recorded it, studied it. He did not understand the words. He did not need to. Some things went deeper than language. Amira would write about this moment later in a research log that would be cited for generations. She would describe the scientific implications, the breakthrough in interspecies relations, the possibilities for future cooperation between humans and Verratti, but she would end with something simpler. The Galactic Union has 17 species classified as too dangerous for contact. The Verratti were number 3 on that list. Today I watched their matriarchs teach a human the song they sing to their young. The Union keeps asking what makes humans special. Perhaps it is simply this: we are the species that runs toward drowning children, even when they have claws. Daniel sat in the nesting grounds until sunset, surrounded by predators who had become something else. Not friends, exactly. That was too human a word, but something close, something new. When he finally stood to leave, Kethare rose with him. She walked him to the edge of the territory, her massive presence a shield against any danger. At the boundary, she stopped. Daniel turned back to look at her. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me in." Kethare tilted her head. She did not understand the words, but she understood enough. She bumped her scarred head gently against his chest, a gesture the cubs used with their mothers. Then she turned and walked back to her family, leaving Daniel to find his own way home. He was smiling the entire way to the end.